Part 3 of the story of Ruth.
Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Shmuel Aber.
A quick summary. Elimelech and his family go to the kingdom of Moav. Machlon, one of his sons, marries a Moavite princess by the name of Ruth. And then Elimelech and his two sons pass away, and Noami and Ruth, who are both penniless at this point, make their way back to the land of Israel. Ruth goes out to collect grain for the poor, leket, and she happens upon the field of Boaz, who's the leader of the generation, and also the cousin of her late husband, Machlon. Boaz, after discovering who she is, shows her a tremendous amount of kindness, invites her to continue collecting in the field, and he guarantees her that she won't be harassed or bothered by anyone. And then, following their conversation, Boaz then invites her to a meal with the workers in the field, giving her bread to dip into vinegar, and also a small amount of roasted grain. What's really interesting about this tiny gift of roasted grain, the Medrash Rabbah writes like this. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Marion says, the verse comes to teach us that if a person performs a mitzvah, he should perform it wholeheartedly. And the Medrash gives a few examples of a few people in history who fall under this category. And the Medrash says like this, had Reuven, the oldest son of Yaakov, known during the time when the sons of Yaakov were trying to sell Joseph, as a slave, had he known that the Torah was later on going to record the story and his part in the story, the verse says, Reuven heard and he rescued him, Joseph, from their hands. The Medrash says, had Reuven known that that part of the story would be recorded in the Torah, Reuven would have not just saved his brother from their hands, Reuven would have actually carried Joseph on his shoulders to his father. The Yafei Anaf, who was Rav Shmuel Yafe Ashkenazi, he lived in the 1500s, he explains like this, Reuven was a perfect tzaddik. Everything he did was absolutely perfect. He wouldn't have behaved any better, but he would have prioritized this story had he known that it would have been recorded, which meant he had a bunch of decisions to make in regards to his behavior for that day, all the different things he needed to take care of. He made a perfect decision based on all the things he needed to do and based on all the information that he had. But had he known that this story would have also been recorded in the Torah, he would have changed his calculations and the way he would have made his decisions. He would have said, future generations are going to learn the story. I need to push myself further than what's even required according to Torah, because future generations are going to read it. The Medrash continues a similar type of story. Had Aaron known that Hashem was going to dictate his greeting of his brother, Moshe, arriving in the land of Egypt, Aaron came to greet him. Aaron was the older brother. Technically, Aaron should have been the leader. Yet Aaron came to greet Moshe. Had Aaron known that that part of the story would have made it into the actual Torah, he would have come to meet Moshe with drums and with dancing to show how much he treasured his younger brother becoming the leader in his place. And the Medrash continues and said, had Boaz known that Hashem was going to record his story of his gift he's giving to this girl who he's trying to help out, Ruth, who's penniless and who needs support, and he gave her roasted grain, had he known that Shmuel Hanavi was going to record that in the Book of Ruth, he would have fed her fattened calves. But he didn't know. And the Medrash ends off very beautifully. The Medrash says, in the past, when people behaved and they did a mitzvah, they did something great, a prophet would write it down and be mentioned in the Torah. But nowadays, when we do good actions, who writes it down? And the Medrash says it is all written down. Eliyahu Hanavi writes down all our good deeds, and Mashiach and Hashem affix a seal onto it. Now, this meal has a much deeper significance than what meets the eye. And the greatest proof, the Yafei Anaf says, the greatest proof is, why do we need to know that Boaz invited Ruth to the meal? It's not really that important. Boaz invited her to a meal. Why do we need to know that information? It doesn't really pertain to the story that much. So why are we being told this? And the Medrash Rabbah and Ruth says that there was a much deeper meaning behind the meal. 6 future events were all being prophetically told through the events in the meal. What happened in the meal? There's 6 things that happened in the meal, and each of these 6 things happened to 6 future people. First part of the meal was Boaz instructs Ruth to come here. Second part of the meal, Boaz instructs her to eat of the bread. Third part, Boaz instructs her to dip the bread into the vinegar. Then, fourth part, she sat next to the reapers. Fifth part, he handed her roasted grain. And sixth part of the meal was she ate, was satisfied, and there was some left over. And the Medrash Rabbah says 6 different people in the future were all going to have a life experience that was going to mirror the events of this meal. The 6 people were David HaMelech, King David, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, Menashe HaMelech, which is very interesting. King Menashe is also in this list, King Mashiach, and also Boaz himself. And I'll just go through one of them just to show how each of the 6 steps happened. David HaMelech had these 6 steps in his life. Boaz instructing Ruth to come here mirrored David HaMelech's ascension to kingship. Then Boaz instructing her to eat of the bread. This is the bread of kingship. David HaMelech actually eating of the bread of kingship. Boaz instructing her to dip her loaf into vinegar represented the suffering that David HaMelech had from the rebellion of his son Absalom. Vinegar, it's bitter, and David HaMelech experienced a very, very bitter part of his life. And then sitting beside the reapers represented David HaMelech losing his kingship and literally being regarded like a regular citizen during the rebellion of his son. Then Boaz handing her roasted grain represented David HaMelech getting back his kingship. And then eating, being satisfied, and the being left over is a reference to David HaMelech eating in this world, eating during the times of Mashiach, and eating in the future days. So you see in this meal, which seems to be very much an extra detail in the story of Ruth, it's foretelling of future events. Now, once Ruth finished the meal, the Malbim explains she didn't wait to do zimun, the communal grace after meals, the benching after the meals. It wasn't modest for her to be included within the benching of the other collectors. So she got up and she continued to collect. And as soon as she got up, Boaz calls the young men with instructions. And it's so beautiful to see the instructions represented such a deep sensitivity and kindness on the part of Boaz. Additionally, the Gerish Shmuel and Rabbeinu Yosef Yachya says you can see her alacrity. Most people after a good meal, they want to relax, they want to sit around. But in her case, as soon as she was finished the meal, she instantly got up and continued collecting. The verse says, and when she arose to glean, to collect, Boaz ordered his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not humiliate her. And it continues the verse, and also let some sheaves fall for her, even from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So Boaz, in his deep sensitivity towards Ruth, is now instructing his men, firstly, do not humiliate her, and secondly, start helping her out. Purposely let the sheaves fall on the floor, let the pieces fall on the floor, so she can have an easier time finding things to collect, finding stalks of barley to collect. There's an opinion in Medrash Rabbah that says that the overseer, the original conversation that Boaz had with the overseer when he was trying to discredit Ruth, but the overseer said, she's really lazy. She's been collecting already for a great part of the day, and she doesn't even have any barley. Now, he intended to possibly discredit her, but all that Boaz heard was she doesn't have enough food. So now Boaz is highly motivated to secretly help Ruth out because she clearly doesn't have enough food, as was told to him by the overseer. The Malbim explained that Boaz's intention was to support Ruth with dignity. He could have just handed her the grain, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to make sure that she could, in a very dignified way, collect the grain on her own without feeling like she's receiving any charity of any kind. And that way, the bundles will be declared forgotten and ownerless. V'azavtam, says the verse, declared totally ownerless. This would help Boaz avoid the problem of truma and maisa, all the halachic ramifications of his responsibility to the food, his own food. He'd declare it ownerless. Now she could take the food in a very honorable way without her feeling like she's a charity. Additionally, the Malbim explains that Boaz instructed the men that if they see her accidentally taking produce which halachically she's not allowed to take, they're not to scream at her. workers would be very careful to make sure that if there's poor people going to the field and they're taking the parts of the field that they're not allowed to take, the parts that belong to the owner, they're going to instantly scream at the poor people, leave it alone, it's not yours. The Malbim says Boaz told the workers, leave her. Whatever she takes, let her take it. You're not to scream at her, you're not to humiliate her. She might not realize that what she's taking is not hers, and you're not to make a scene of it, you're not to humiliate her. The Yalkut Shimoni said that when Boaz told his workers, don't scorn her, don't rebuke her, don't make it difficult for her, the Yalkut Shimoni says, Boaz reminded the workers, she's of a royal lineage. You can't humiliate her. Her embarrassment will be so deep because she's not just a regular citizen, she's a princess. Her father's a king or her grandfather's a king. The humiliation that you're going to bring to her by screaming at her if she takes the wrong thing is going to be very, very deep. The Igerish Shmuel explains that it's the way of workers to give a lot less than what the employer demands. They're very sensitive with the employer's money, and if the employer wants to give away even the employer's belongings, the workers are always going to be very protective, and they can always give less what the employer had in mind. And it's for that reason that Boaz doubly enforced how careful they have to be with the rules. He told them, don't be sensitive on my behalf. I want you to let her collect between the sheaves, do not trouble her, do not embarrass her, and purposely put things out so that she could collect them. And he even added the extra word lamer. The word lamer in the verse doesn't really belong there, but Boaz commanded the young men, saying he's doubly convincing them to be extra motivated, not to try and save Boaz's money, but to go out of their way to help Ruth. It's very interesting. In Medrash Rabbah, talking on this discussion of the deep sensitivity and kindness, the Medrash Rabbah brings a bunch of really great righteous men who behaved in a similar way. Rabbi Yochanan would scatter selah coins on the ground because it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Ba. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Ba was very poor, and Rabbi Yochanan would purposely scatter coins on the floor so that he could acquire them secretly in a private way that he would never know where they came from. Rabbeinu would declare grits ownerless so that Rabbi Shimon Chalafto could acquire them. So you see the same type of practice that rabbis later learned from Boaz, giving poor people food in a private, quiet way that they could just acquire it without even realizing that it's been purposely left for them. The Igerish Shmuel says that Boaz didn't just tell them to passively leave the sheaves on the floor, the forgotten sheaves and the grain, but he explains that Boaz told them to actively make sure that Ruth is the one to receive it. They were to calculate which trajectory Ruth was traveling on and make sure that the barley grain that was left would purposely go within the trajectory of Ruth so that she could pick it up, ensuring that she was able to get as much of the grain as possible. Boaz wanted the workers to actively plan out the dropping of the sheaves in such a way that Ruth could get as much as possible. The Malbim explains that even though the workers listened to Boaz and left out not just regular pieces, but they even left out massive bundles of shichacha for her to collect, which would have been far easier. She could have just picked up the entire bundle because it was forgotten. She didn't do it. She didn't pick them up. She only took the smaller pieces of leket. But because she spent the entire day collecting, at the time the day was over, she collected a tremendous amount of food. The verse says, so she gleaned in the field until evening, and she milled, and the Rabbah explains she actually beat the stalks against the ground so she could only bring home just the seeds. And she produced about an ephah of barley. The Igerish Shmuel explained the amount she collected, an ephah of barley, is a tremendous amount of barley. And due to her great strength and might, Ruth was able to carry the full ephah all by herself home. In modern context, how much seeds she collected of barley, according to the Chazon Ish, the amount of barley grains that she carried home that day was 26.5 kilograms, which is about 58 pounds. Just on her own, she managed to collect 58 pounds worth of barley seeds. The Igerish Shmuel explains that she beat out the ephah of barley. It took extra time, and that's why she ended up spending until the evening at the field, because she spent all that time not just bringing the whole stalk home, but bringing only the seeds back home. And so after a very successful day of collecting in Boaz's field, the verse says she carried it and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she took it out to show her and gave her what she had left over from eating her fill. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today and where did you work? Blessed be he who took note of you. So she, Ruth, told her mother-in-law about whom she had worked with, and she said, the name of the man who I worked today is Boaz. The Malbim explains that Noami was so shocked by the amount of grain that Ruth had collected, an amount that only a worker would typically get. She had so much grain, it didn't make sense that she had received this unless she'd actually worked in a field. And that's actually the reason why she said, Noami says to Ruth, and where did you work? She assumed she must have found a way to actually work in someone's field and not just collect. Ruth explained to her mother-in-law that she had found favor in Boaz's eyes because she had shown kindness to Noami, and because she had converted and joined the Jewish people. But she also explained that she found favor in Boaz's eyes because he had so much satisfaction in hearing her beautiful behavior that it was almost like she had done a personal favor for him. Just hearing about how well she had behaved had brought Boaz so much happiness. When describing the kindness that Boaz had done to Ruth, Ruth says, and I'll read the Hebrew first, "Vatoime Shem ha'ish asher asisi imoy hayoim Boaz," which translates as, "The name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz." From the phraseology of the verse, it almost sounds like Ruth did the favor to Boaz, not the other way around. Boaz had been so kind to Ruth, yet when Ruth describes it, Ruth says, "I did a kindness to Boaz." That's almost how it sounds. And Rabbi Yeshua says an incredible statement. He says, "More than the owner does for the poor person does for the owner." Ruth said, "Today I performed many actions and many favors for him because he gave me a slice of bread." The poor man is actually doing a favor for the rich man because he's letting the rich man do kindness to him. The Hefei Torah, on the same quote in the Zohar, says that Ruth was saying, in addition to all the spiritual gifts in the world to come that I gave to Boaz by accepting his charity, I also gave him merit in this world. His rest of his money is now blessed. I saved him from death, and I gave him the opportunity to grab honor. So I did kindness to him by letting him do kindness to me. After hearing the events of the day and all the things that Ruth had told Noami, the verse says, "And Noami said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he to Hashem who has not abandoned his kindness with the living and with the dead." And Noami said to her, to Ruth, "The man is related to us. He is one of our near kinsmen, Migoya Leinohu." So Naomi is now explaining to Ruth that Boaz is not just the leader of the generation and an incredibly righteous man. Boaz is a tremendously close relative. But the way it's phrased is Migoya Leinohu. He's literally translated as his kinsman. He's a close family member, but of course it means something a lot deeper. The Igeres Shmuel explains that Naomi was praising Boaz for doing kindness with the dead because when people pass away, they get tremendous joy and they receive a lot of pleasure when people are kind to their relatives. So even though Machlon and Kilian and Elimelech had all passed away, they were receiving so much joy because of the kindness that Boaz was doing to Ruth and Naomi. The Malbim says that Naomi first gave blessing to Hashem for his kindness in not abandoning the living, which was Boaz and the dignity that he was giving to Naomi and Ruth, but also to the dead because Naomi understood that Boaz was able to marry Ruth. And we're going to talk about this shortly. And thereby bringing peace to Machlon's soul so that his name won't be blotted out from the Jewish people. And we'll talk about this. Although we're going to discuss later on at much greater length what Goya Leinohu, Migoya Leinohu means, and it's become much more significant as the story comes along, there's two ways of understanding what it means already now. And we'll just go through them quickly, even though later on we're going to talk about them at much greater length. Migoya Leinohu could mean that Naomi is telling Ruth that he is someone who you could have a Yibum-like marriage with. Yibum is a Torah law that if a man gets married to a woman and they do not have any children and then he passes away, she has a commandment to marry her deceased husband's brother. And then the name of her first husband will be carried on through the child that she has with the brother of the man that passed away. That's the Torah scenario of Yibum. But the idea of Yibum, though, doesn't just carry on with the brother, it carries on with the family. And again, this is something we will discuss at much greater length later on. A second way to describe what does Migoya Leinohu mean, it could be regarding the laws of redeeming fields. that the Torah in Vayikra talks about if someone has a field, there's a responsibility of the close relatives to come and redeem that field, so that field stays within that same tribe and stays within the same family. And it could be that Naomi was referencing to her daughter-in-law, Migoyalenuhu, Boaz is a close relative and he could buy our field. But however you want to explain it, Naomi was very excited when she heard that the person who helped Ruth out was a close relative, someone who could either perform one of these two commandments in the Torah. Ruth the Moavite, though, heard that her mother-in-law was so excited, and she now tells her mother-in-law, the verse goes like this, Ruth the Moavite said, he even told me, telling her mother-in-law, Boaz even told me, stay close to my workers until all my harvest is finished. So Ruth is now telling her mother-in-law, it wasn't just that Boaz was so kind to me, Boaz additionally insisted that I stay by his fields until the harvesting's over, which is going to be a full 3 months. The mom explains why she called Ruth the Moavite. Suddenly, we're just mentioning again Ruth the Moavite. What's going on precisely? And the mom explains that she didn't understand Naomi's excitement. Naomi said, oh, it's a relative. And she didn't understand exactly what it meant. She hadn't been born Jewish. She hasn't lived in the land of Israel among the culture of the Jewish people. So when Naomi gets instantly excited, and she has a whole bunch of motivations for getting excited, Ruth, explains the Malbim, didn't understand what the excitement was. Or it could be, explains the Malbim, that Ruth assumed that Boaz was planning to set her up with one of her workers. That's the reason why it was good news. And she said, yes, he actually told me to be in the field next to the workers. She'd assumed that Boaz was planning to make a shidduch with her, and she didn't realize that Naomi already had intentions at this point and onwards, that perhaps Boaz himself would be the person that would marry Ruth. So to address this misunderstanding, in the next verse, Naomi tells her daughter-in-law, and Naomi answers her daughter-in-law, it is best, daughter, that you go out with the goals and not be annoyed in some other field. Naomi is telling Ruth, don't make yourselves available for the men in the field and try to find a marriage through one of them. Stay with the women, because if you wait through the harvest season, you might be able to marry Boaz himself, and you don't want to have any doubtful scenarios like the Malbim and also Al-Sheikh explained by being in the proximity of any of the men. Stay with the women in the field, stay in that field as Boaz advised you, and at the end of the harvest season, Naomi was going to try to arrange events in such a way that Ruth could actually make herself available for Boaz. So the verse actually says she followed her mother-in-law's instructions. The verse says, so she kept close to the maidens of Boaz, to glean with them until the end of the barley harvest and of the wheat harvest, and she continued to live with her mother-in-law. So the barley harvest is what starts the harvesting off. The barley becomes ready earlier, and then at some point later on, the wheat becomes ready as well, and she continued staying in that same field, collecting the food from the field throughout the entire season. The Medrash Rabbah says in the name of Rav Shmuel bar Nachman, from the beginning of the barley harvest until the end of the wheat harvest is 3 months. So there's a full 3 months from the time of the barley harvest to the end of the wheat harvest. That's the harvesting period in the land of Israel. That 3 months, Ruth stayed in the field of Boaz, and not just any of the fields of Boaz, the very field that Boaz instructed her to stay in. That's where she stayed. The Maharzu, which is a famous commentary on the Medrash Rabbah, says she arrived in the land of Israel on the 16th of Nisan, and therefore she finished collecting on the 16th of Tammuz, which is one day before the 17th of Tammuz, which nowadays is a fast day, a very sad day in Jewish history. She finished collecting on the 16th of Tammuz. Why is that so important? Because the law is you need to have a 3-month waiting period from the time of conversion or from the time a person's a widow or a divorcee. Before they get remarried, they need to wait 3 months. The reason is because if she is pregnant and she doesn't know, and she gets married to another man a month later, or a convert was pregnant and then joins the Jewish people and gets married to someone else, you won't be able to tell if this child is the son of the first husband or the second husband. But if you wait 3 months, at that point, she'll know with certainty if she's pregnant. And therefore, if she has a baby 6 months later, well, we know that it's from the first husband. If she has a baby 9 months later, well, we know it's from the second husband. It's a lot easier to discern, and it's critical in Jewish law to discern who the father or the husband is for so many reasons, but most importantly for the reason, who can this child then get married to? There are so many restrictions on people who a person's allowed to get married to regarding relatives, and if you don't know who the father is, you have a big problem because you don't know who the child is allowed to get married to. The mom explains that during the time when she collected, she wasn't just there for 1 day, she was there for 3 months. So she stayed close to the maidens of Boaz, and even though she developed a relationship with all of the household of Boaz, she was now a fixture in the household of Boaz. She was hanging around for a long time in the same field, in the proximity of Boaz's household. The mom explains her love for Noami, her mother-in-law, was far greater. And therefore, even though she developed these wonderful new relationships with Boaz's household and Boaz's maidens, she still returned back to her mother-in-law. And once the 3 months were done, she no longer went to Boaz's house anymore. She was done. Her love for her mother-in-law trumped her love for anybody else. And now she returned to her mother-in-law's house, and that's where she remained. The Alshich explains that when Boaz saw that Ruth was coming every single day, the Alshich says beautifully, Boaz instructed his wife's maidens to keep the company of Ruth. Ruth and Noami had showed up in town before they had arrived in the land of Israel by the funeral of Boaz's wife. Boaz's wife had passed away shortly before. And now Boaz had a feeling that Ruth was going to be an important part of his life, and he wanted them to get used to serving Ruth. So when he saw that Ruth was following his instructions and hanging around the field, he instructed his maidens of his wife to hang around Ruth and to help her out. They were hanging around regardless, even though they didn't have a job anymore because Boaz's wife had already passed away. They hung around in the hope that whoever Boaz would next marry, they would be able to serve. And Boaz understood this. So Boaz told them, help out Ruth. He thought there might be a possibility he might get married to her. And he realized that they wanted a job. And he also understood that it'd be very good for them to accustom themselves to following Ruth and to taking care of Ruth. So he said, on the hope that this might actually happen, Boaz already, according to the Alshach, had an idea that Ruth might be someone he might get married to. And he said, you know what? This suits everyone's needs. Let these women get used to accustoming themselves to being humble under the authority of Ruth. That way they could keep the job. Ruth will have help, and this will serve purposes on all angles. The Alshich explains that after 3 months had gone by, during which Ruth was halakhically not allowed to get married to anyone, Noami now needs to have a conversation with Ruth, convincing her that now's the time for herself to get a husband. Now, Ruth, of course, wanted to get remarried, but it couldn't have been a conversation until that point, because until that point, halakhically, Ruth was not permitted to get married. So the verse now continues. After the 3 months are finally over, the Alshich explains that's the context for the verse. Noami, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, I shall seek security for you, which will be good for you. This is a conversation of the mother-in-law convincing the daughter-in-law, which is so surprising anyway, as we'll explain. The mother-in-law is convincing her daughter-in-law it's time to get remarried. The Igerish Shmuel says usually it's the way of a mother-in-law to not want her daughter-in-law to get remarried after the son passes away. In this regard, Noami was exceptionally different. She loved Ruth so deeply. In fact, if you look at the verse, she calls her my daughter. She says, I'm not like your mother-in-law in this regard. I need you to get remarried. She said, I'm like your mother. You need to get remarried. I need to find someone for you to get remarried to. And she genuinely meant it. The Alshich explains something absolutely beautiful. Before Noami had left the land of Israel and her 2 daughters-in-laws were following her, she begged them to leave, and then she gave them a blessing. And the blessing had 2 parts. The blessing was, each of you return to your mother's house. May Hashem deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. That was blessing number 1, that they're going to be able to return back to their mother's house. And blessing number 2 was that Hashem should grant you that you may find rest each in the home of a husband. They were blessed by Noami to be able to find a husband. And Naomi was now worried. 3 months had gone by. She had given Rus and Orpah both this blessing that they would be able to return to their mother and they also would have a husband. And she said, no, Rus might be feeling a lot of regret and pain because both blessings haven't been fulfilled. So the Al-Sheikh says, this is the reason why Naomi calls Rus over for this serious conversation. She's concerned Naomi might be very hurt. What's happened to those blessings? Naomi had blessed her with blessings. Naomi was not a regular woman. Her blessings contained tremendous amount of power. And what's going on? She'd been blessed by Naomi and it hadn't happened. That's why in the verse, Naomi calls Rus my daughter. Regarding the first half of the blessing, going to your mother's house, she said, that part of the blessing, Rus, has happened. I believe you're like a daughter to me. You're my daughter. You return to your mother's house. You're living with me. That part of the blessing has been fulfilled. But now, what about part number 2 of the blessing? You're going to have a husband. In that regard, Naomi says, I'm going to take care of it. Until now, I haven't, because halachically you can't join the Jewish people. It was an impossibility. But if you think that blessing is not going to be fulfilled, it's going to be fulfilled. And not only is it going to be fulfilled, I'm going to help and make sure and take care of the matter to ensure that you find a husband no matter what. Additionally, the Al-Sheikh explains that although usually mother-in-law and daughter-in-laws are very strained, and there's always a lot of stress in that relationship, even in the best of mother and daughter-in-law relationships, it's a very, very nuanced relationship with a lot of possible anxiety involved and a lot of motivations and sometimes cross motivations between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. In this case, as the story is going to unfold, the Al-Sheikh makes it clear Naomi's motivation was entirely for Rus's benefits. She wasn't trying to play her own angles, because you could look at this story and say that maybe she wanted to get rid of Rus. Maybe Naomi was saying, okay, I'm back home now. I have this daughter-in-law hanging around. I'm not really interested in watching and taking care of her. Well, that's the reason I'm so motivated to find a match. The Al-Sheikh makes it clear that's not the motivation. Additionally, the Al-Sheikh says maybe she was very worried, and we'll talk about this shortly. She was very worried about the soul of her husband. Her husband had been married to Rus. Her husband's soul was now in a restless state because they didn't have any children and there was no one to carry on his name. So now she desperately needed Rus to get married to someone, especially a relative, in order to continue her husband's name. And that's what was motivating. And Al-Sheikh makes it clear, no, that most certainly was not. Her motivation in helping Rus was the goodness of Rus. And also, maybe she helping out her relative, her cousin Boaz didn't have a wife now. Maybe she wants to make this match in order to help her relative out, find a worthy wife. And Rus being a part of the story was just incidental. It wasn't really part of her motivation. And again, the Al-Sheikh makes it clear, no, the driving motivation of Naomi helping Rus was, like Naomi's name implies, pleasantness. She genuinely was trying to help Rus out. She loved Rus. She was trying to seek out the true goodness of her daughter-in-law. So she tells her daughter-in-law like this. She says in the verse, now Boaz, our kinsman, and Rashi writes, a relative, with whose maidens you have been, behold, he is winnowing the barley on the threshing floor tonight. Now you're starting to see the plot thicken. Naomi's telling Rus the clear intentions that Naomi wants to make a marriage between Boaz and Rus. And she's telling Rus where Boaz is. The harvesting season is over. The collecting of the grain is all done, but there are still processes to be had. Now the grain is in the stalk form, which means it hasn't yet been, it's not ready to eat. It needs to be crushed and then needs to be thrown up in the air, and the bad part of the stalk needs to be removed from the grain. That was a process. But also, as you're going to see, Rashi explains, there was a massive outbreak of thievery, which meant keeping the finished product in the field would mean that people would be going to the field and just stealing it from the open field. Well, then you have to work really hard and you have to prepare the grain. There's a lot less incentive to steal it. But once it's been winnowed and threshed and it's now prepared, and stealing that grain, well, that grain is worth a fortune. And it's important to remember the context of the story. This is after a 10-year famine. This is the first harvest, the first barley harvest, the first wheat harvest after a severe 10-year famine, considered one of the worst famines in human history. People were thieving and stealing before now. The motivation to steal at this point would be tremendously high, which meant that Boaz would be sleeping in the field. And Noami knew that, and Noami is now telling Ruth, Boaz is going to be in the field tonight. He's going to be sleeping in the threshing floor. That's where this plan that I'm going to tell you now is going to needs to unfold. Igarish Shmuel says that Noami knew there was two things that hold Ruth back regarding finding a new husband. She'd already been married before. And so marrying again should have two massive reservations. Number one, the Igarish Shmuel explains, she'd be worried that the family she's marrying into wouldn't be as honorable as the family she was married to. She was already married into an extremely dignified family. Elimelech, Machlon, and Killian, yes, they made what looks like a tremendous mistake by leaving the land of Israel. Nonetheless, they were incredibly great people. And their family was the future royalty. Everyone knew it. They were part of the royal family, the future royal family. They were descendants of Nachshon and Aminadav and Yehuda and Peretz and Chester. And they came from a tremendously royal family, a tremendously honorable family. And Naomi knew that Ruth wouldn't be very excited about jumping from a very honorable family, just going and marrying any other person. And number two, she'd be concerned about the actual husband himself. Maybe he isn't a good person. And to counter both those arguments, Naomi's now convincing Ruth, Boaz comes from the same family. So regarding the family, you don't have to worry. Boaz is literally our cousin. He's the same family. And regarding his character, she reminds him, this is the person whose field you've been collecting for the past 3 months. He's an honorable person. The amount of kindness he's shown to you should show you how honorable he is. His character is stellar. The Malbim explains that the winnowing of the barley happened outside the threshing floor, where the wind was able to blow. And if Ruth would be there, everyone working would see her there. But Naomi wasn't concerned. Again, Naomi had a plan, and a plan was going to be a very interesting plan, which we'll unpack. But Naomi wasn't concerned that people would see her there. The reason why is once the collecting of the grain was done in those days, all the family would join the owner of the field for the winnowing. They would be there. They would watch. They would hang around. It was a party. It was a party for the close family to be present during the success of their family member. They'd all come, they'd all be there. And so it wouldn't be weird in the slightest if Ruth was there. Ruth was a very close relative. Naomi was Boaz's aunt, and Ruth was married to Boaz's first cousin. It wouldn't have been strange in the slightest that Ruth was hanging around. The Malbim explains that Naomi was telling Ruth, start off your night by this party, by this event in Boaz's threshing floor. No one will be surprised to see you. They'll be thrilled to see you. You're a close family member. You belong there. And then continues Naomi. And then when you're there, bathe and scent yourself, dress yourselves in your finest garb, go down to the threshing floor, but do not identify yourself to the man. Don't identify yourself to Boaz until he has finished eating and drinking. So Ruth is to hide in the threshing floor. When no one sees her, she's to go inside there. She's not even let Boaz know that she's there. She should just sneak into the threshing floor when no one's watching, bathe and scent herself and dress herself, and then hide. And when he lies down, continues the verse, take note of the place where he lies, see where Boaz is, go in, uncover his feet while he's sleeping, and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. This is a very brazen plan, and Ruth doesn't flinch. She tells her mother-in-law, and she trusts her mother-in-law implicitly. She tells her mother-in-law, all that you say to me, I will do. So even though this plan sounds outrageous, Ruth doesn't question her mother-in-law in the slightest. Ruth says, okay, if this is what you want me to do, you want me to go hide myself in the threshing floor, and when Boaz sleeps in the threshing floor for the night, I'm to uncover his feet and lie down next to his feet. If this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. Now, Rashi and Ruth's rabbis, both of them explain the meaning. What does bathe mean? Bathe doesn't mean just literal bathing, but it means removing contamination of idolatry from yourself. Ruth had been involved in an idolatrous society for her whole life until she met Elimelech and his family. Naomi was telling her, remove whatever vestiges of contamination you have in your life, remove it. Scent yourself, these are mitzvahs and good acts. Place your garments upon you, these are Shabbos clothes. She was telling her daughter-in-law, wear your Shabbos clothes when you go and meet Boaz. The Gemara in the Yerushalmi, in Peah, and Medrash Rabbah as well, says like this. Rabbi Simlai was teaching this verse to his students. And he quoted Rabbi Chanin, and he said, from this story you see something interesting. Ruth, a very poor person, but Ruth had 2 sets of garments. She had regular garments and she had Shabbos garments because her mother-in-law said, put the Shabbos garments on. And the Rabbi Chanina taught that every person needs to have 2 outer garments, one of them for the weekday and one of them for Shabbos. This is where we learn the idea of having Shabbos clothes. Why can't you just wear weekday clothes on Shabbos and everyone has special clothes for Shabbos? It comes from the story of Ruth. When Noami instructs Ruth to wear Shabbos clothes, that's how we know the idea of Shabbos clothes. Now, the interesting part of the story is that once they heard the lesson, the Torah scholars who were listening to the lesson for Amid Simlai, they started crying. These were extremely poor people. Their teachers now teaching them, you need to have regular clothes and you need to have Shabbos clothes. And they said, we don't have enough money. We literally, our outer clothes during the week are the same clothes we wear for Shabbos. We cannot afford 2 pairs of clothes. So Rabbi Simlai heard their concern and he told them, nonetheless, the idea of having Shabbos clothes is so important, you need to change them. You need to, the Matnas Kahuna on Rosh Shabbos says, you need, the way you wrap your clothes during the weekday needs to be different. If you don't have enough money to buy Shabbos clothes, you need to change it around. If you're used to letting your clothes hang during the weekday, then on Shabbos you need to take your belt and wrap your clothes up in such a way that they don't hang. Or the opposite way around. If you usually tie them up during the weekday, then let them hang on Shabbos. You need to change something around. Ruth and Noami teach us a person cannot wear the same clothes, at least in the same way as you wear it during the weekday as wearing it for Shabbos. The Meshiv Nefesh, which is the commentary of the Bach, explains that Noami wasn't telling Ruth to wash herself in the traditional way, to get ready in the traditional way if you're meeting someone important. And Boaz was important. Boaz was the leader of the generation. He was the judge of the generation. He was a tremendously important person in Jewish history in general, as you're going to see as the story unfolds. But it was also the spiritual preparation. Noami was warning Ruth, make yourself spiritually ready, because this spiritual journey of meeting Boaz is not like meeting someone regular. It's almost like the Bach explains, when Yaakov was going to meet Yitzchak and get the blessings from Yitzchak, he prepared himself tremendously spiritually to receive those blessings. Naomi is now telling her daughter-in-law, you need to make sure, remove any remnants of idol worship, do complete tshuva, scour your soul deeply to make sure you're on the highest possible level, because right now you're meeting someone and you could be bringing down the light of Mashiach. Turns out that's precisely what happened. But Noami was warning Ruth, you're about to bring down tremendously high energy, just like with Yaakov getting the blessings from Yitzchak and drawing down this tremendous energy. She's warning her daughter-in-law, do a deep dive into your soul. Make sure you're fully spiritually ready to be together with Boaz. Rashi says the way we read the verse and the way we write the verse is not the same. The way that it's seen in the actual verse, you'll see it doesn't say you will go down to the threshing floor. It says I will go down to the threshing floor. And Rashi explains, Naomi is telling Ruth, I'm going to bring my merit along with you. My merit will come along with you. And the Meshiv Nefesh says that in addition to Naomi saying that her merit will go along with Ruth, Naomi also physically escorted Ruth to the threshing floor. The Malbim explains the plan would be that everyone would finish working and would all start going home. Then Boaz would eat and drink. He was hungry. And then what would Boaz do when he was done? He would sit down and he would learn Torah. And in the meantime, while Boaz is busy learning Torah, that's the time when Ruth would sneak away from everyone else as they're all finishing because winnowing is over, and she would find a quiet place in the threshing floor. And the Malbim explains that the threshing floor was surrounded by partitions. It wasn't a regular part of the field. It was a hard part of the field. You had to thresh on it, so it was very hard. And it was surrounded by partitions, I'm assuming for security to ensure that people didn't come in unsurprised. But Boaz would be learning, and that would be the opportunity for Naomi to sneak into the threshing floor. Boaz wouldn't sleep in the field, that would be dangerous, but rather in the threshing floor. And Ruth would be able to go into the threshing floor and very easily identify precisely where Boaz was sleeping. She would then lie down, she would uncover his feet, and the uncovering of his feet, explained the Malbim, was a reference to chalitza. Chalitza is a special commandment. The commandment is in the case of the brother-in-law, the same law that we mentioned before. But if a man passes away, has a wife and has no children, the wife then has a commandment to marry the brother of the deceased husband. But what if the guy says no? The guy says, listen, my brother liked you. I can't stand you. I don't want to get married to you. What happens then? They do not have to get married, but there's a ceremony called chalitza. Chalitza is where she removes his shoe and says his intentions that he doesn't want to marry her. It's a really interesting commandment in the Torah, and it involves the removal of a shoe. Now, in the case of Boaz and Ruth, there was no mitzvah, commandment of Yibum, because Machlon, the husband of Ruth, was not brothers with Boaz, but rather a cousin. But even so, it would bring tremendous comfort to the soul of Machlon and let the soul of Machlon continue if a relative married Ruth. So the marriage of Boaz and Ruth together was tremendously important for the soul to be able to continue in this world. For Machlon's soul to come back down, it could only come down if a relative was the one to marry Ruth. So Ruth uncovering the feet of Boaz was a reminder to Boaz that he could do this Yibum-like commandment with Ruth and be able to bring tremendous kindness to the soul of Machlon. Now, what was the plan of Ruth? And why was it done in this way? Rabbi Moshe Alshich, who I've already quoted many times, a tremendous rabbi in the city of Sfas, and he wrote a tremendous book on the Book of Ruth. And he asks a whole string of questions about the story. Any person going through the story would already have so many questions. What's going on? What's Naomi's plan? Ruth is going to go in the middle of the night to this righteous man and lie down by his feet. What exactly was the plan? This doesn't sound very righteous. It doesn't sound very upstanding. What's going on over here? The Alshich asks a whole string of questions. The Alshich actually answers it beautifully. And there are many ways of asking these questions, and there's also many answers to these questions. We're going to take the approach of the Alshich because it's a beautiful approach and we have to pick one. The Alshich asks like this: Noami was a woman complete with wisdom and fear of God and modest conduct. How could she have advised Ruth to behave like this? This advice is so absolutely puzzling. What inspired her to advise Ruth with such a reckless plan, to go in the middle of the night, in the darkness, to lie down next to Boaz, to uncover his feet, to lie down beside him? Noami was such a wise woman, a woman that had suffered so much in so much grace. Why would she tell her daughter-in-law, who she loved, and we know she loved her, to appear and to do things that look like the behavior of a harlot? She loves her daughter-in-law. Why would she give her such type of advice? Additionally, it challenges them. What was the plan exactly? Boaz is going to wake up in the middle of the night. He's going to find a woman lying by his feet. His anger is going to flare up, and he's going to scream out in shock. Remember, Boaz is the leader of the generation, but also a very wealthy man with all of his attendants nearby. He's going to say, there's a crazy person next to me. Grab her, get rid of her, and drag her away. And she's going to be deeply humiliated. Her reputation is going to be entirely ruined. It's going to create a massive scandal, and it's going to lead to a deep humiliation of Ruth. What was the plan? And even if Boaz somehow was overcome by passion, in spite of his age, Boaz was a very old man, even so, this is going to be deeply humiliating for Ruth. But people find out what happened. And even if Boaz didn't scream at her, didn't chase her away, and didn't humiliate her, and wasn't overcome by her beauty, even if all of those things didn't actually play out, if Boaz just sent her away, now Ruth is stuck by herself, a beautiful woman in the middle of the night at a very dangerous time in Jewish history. How could Naomi let that happen? She's now walking on her own in the middle of the night? That's extremely dangerous. Alshich continues, if Naomi believed that this marriage was supposed to happen, that Boaz was somehow supposed to marry Ruth, that it was a good marriage for them to get married to, why couldn't she have just done it in the regular way? The way all people get married, in the broad daylight. Naomi herself should go to Boaz, or she should send a matchmaker to Boaz and say, I found a great woman for you. She's modest and she has virtue. She left her father and her mother after her husband's death, and she came to join under the wings of Hashem. There's no one else like her. She's a fantastic match. Spread your wings upon her and marry her. But why such a strange plan, sending her in the middle of the night in such a strange way? Now, in order to understand the answer, there's a few principles that we need to explain first. Principle number one is a story that happened hundreds of years, 700 years before our story. During the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot had been living in that city. And in the merit of his own good behavior with Abraham, and also in the merit of Abraham, he was saved. Him and his two daughters and his wife managed to escape the cities before the cities were destroyed. His wife turned around and died, turned into a pillar of salt. But the two daughters and Lot, they managed to survive. They went to a small city, but they were so scared of the proximity to the large cities, they decided it was too risky. They ran to the mountains, and the daughters were under the belief that the entire world had been destroyed. The amount of destruction they saw behind them to the cities that they had escaped from, they imagined the entire world was destroyed. And so they believed, incorrectly so, that they three were the last descendants of humanity. It was the two daughters and their father. And they didn't know what to do. They believed that the continuity of humankind all depended on them. And so they realized they need to have children from their father. The behavior, of course, was absolutely unacceptable. A person can never marry anyone of the forbidden relationship in the Torah, especially a father having intimacy with his daughters. At the same time, they believed they were the last people in existence. So they got their father drunk, and on the first night, the eldest daughter of Lot was intimate with the father. And on the second night, they got their father drunk again, and the second daughter was intimate with her father. And from that intimacy, they both had children. The nations of Ammon and Moab are both descendants of these two daughters. And although the behavior was absolutely unacceptable, the intention for their behavior was very pure. They believed there was no one else in the world, and they believed that they were continuing humankind. And so, as a reward of their pure intentions, the eldest daughter was to be reincarnated in one of her descendants, a righteous woman of the nation of Moab. Who she was, people wouldn't know. But many years from then, there was a tradition that there would be a reincarnation of that eldest daughter who behaved not in the correct way, but the intentions were for the sake of Hashem. She would be reincarnated. Additionally, there was a tradition that the line of the kingship of the Jewish people would come from a girl from the nation of Moab. A girl from the nation of Moab would marry into the royal family, into the family of Peretz, from the tribe of Yehuda. In fact, the Gemara in Baba Kama says, Moshe Rabbeinu instructed the Jewish people when they were arriving in the land of Israel and they came nearby the nations of Ammon and the nations of Moab. Moshe warns the Jewish people, do not bother in them. There's going to be a good pigeon. There's going to be a good person from these two nations, two women, one from Moab and one from Ammon, and they're going to join the Jewish people, and they're extremely important. So therefore, do not wage war against this nation, because we need that woman to be able to be born. Noami believed that this girl, this reincarnation of Lot's eldest daughter, the special person that Moshe knew was going to marry into the royal family of Yehuda and have the royal family come from her, was Rus. She had watched Rus carefully, and she believed that this was the woman. Boaz was also curious. A girl from Moab was joining the Jewish people. This is the first time it's ever happened. And Boaz was very interested. And although he was impressed by Ruth's piety, he wasn't certain that she was the woman. He had a good feeling about it, but he wasn't certain. Noami believed with a lot more passion that she was the woman that people had been talking about for hundreds of years, but Boaz wasn't so sure. Now, as we mentioned earlier on, when a person passes away without any children, his spirit rests within the wife. This is what the Al-Sheikh explains. His spirit rests within the wife, and if he marries the brother, which is the actual commandment, but if he marries any of the relatives of the husband, that soul is able to come back, and it's no longer attached to the wife anymore. It then passes down into the soul of the child that they have together. So any relative of Machlin, in this case, who would marry Rus, would be able to free the soul of Machlin, detach it from Rus, because right now the soul of Machlin was connected to Rus. It would be able to detach it from Rus, and then it would be able to be reincarnated into the child that they have together. So although the actual commandment of Yibum only applies with the brother, in the Torah it does not talk about other relatives but the commandment, nonetheless, the Alshich explains that this idea doesn't just apply to the brother in regards to freeing the spiritual part, freeing the soul and letting it be reincarnated in the child. It applies not just to the brother, but to everyone. And the final introduction, before we are able to understand Naomi's plan for Ruth, throughout the story, you see something very interesting in the verses. The language about Ruth, you see many times that she's referred to in plural form. Not just about her, but about them. What's the them? Because Boaz, for example, he was able to see on Ruth that she was carrying a second soul. Machlon's soul was literally attached to Ruth's soul. So when he refers to her, he wasn't just referring to her own spirit, her own soul, but the spirit of her husband who was connected to her. It's a deep curiosity, but the Alshich explains this is what's going on. That's why this plural form is referred to Ruth all the time. The Alshich explains like this. Naomi herself had a slight doubt whether Ruth was the person who was supposed to marry into the family and who the royal family of the Jewish people were going to come from. And she said, if I go to Boaz directly and I suggest a match, he'll be doubtful. He won't be sure. Maybe he'll agree, maybe he won't agree. He might say, it's a great opinion. You seem very certain of it, but I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no. Boaz might have a lot of reservations. And therefore, her inner wisdom inspired her to advise Ruth to perform this act, to go to the threshing floor, to uncover Boaz's feet, to lie down there for the sake of heaven, because he was a redeemer. He had the ability to redeem the soul of Machlon. And then, just as Lot, in the original story, he ate, drank, and then he was with his daughters, so too Ruth would come to Boaz after he had eaten and drunk. She would lie at his feet, and she'd lie beside him, all for the sake of heaven. Again, this wasn't Ruth's plan, but now that she was doing it for her mother-in-law, it would be for the sake of heaven. And by doing this, Boaz would suddenly understand what was going on. He would remember the original story, and he'd realize straight away, this is a tremendously holy woman, a woman with the same soul as Lot's older daughter. And what's the plan? The plan is to bring about the soul of Yishai, to bring about the birth of King David, who was going to come from this relationship. Although there are many explanations on explaining the story, and I just explained you one, the Alshich, there is another interesting explanation, the Igeres Shmuel, the Shmuel ben Yehuda Usida. He explains that Boaz was worthy of having Mashiach come through him, but the Satan was very desperately trying to interfere into Boaz's remarriage because Mashiach was going to come from it. And therefore, Naomi understood that she had to make the marriage come about in a very strange way. The only way to get past the Satan in this regard was to make the marriage come about in such a strange way that it would be able to break through the traditional system. The Satan wouldn't be able to affect it, and that's how the actual marriage will go through. And that's the reason the Igeres Shmuel gives for why Naomi orchestrated events in such a strange way. In the upcoming podcast, we'll discuss what happens when Ruth actually goes to the threshing floor, following the very, very strange instructions of her mother-in-law.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.